Welcome to the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast with me, Dave Roberts. Today I'm thrilled to welcome Phillip Swan to the show. Phillip is the co-founder of Iridius.ai. He has had a distinguished career in technology and is a leading voice in the AI space. What a pleasure to have you here today, Phillip.
It's great to be here, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start off by learning a little bit more about your own career journey. What led you to co-found Iridius.ai and what problem you were trying to solve?
So my career started off as being an engineer. I wanted to travel the world, and the best way to do that was by being an engineer, and I wanted to work around the world. And I lived in France for several years, and then I got transferred to the US, and where I've stayed now for over 30 years. And it's always been in the forefront of technology. So it started off way back when in secure communications, which turned into what became mobile today. And similarly with the internet, started a very early stage voice over IP company that turned into the backbone of voice over IP that we got acquired by Texas Instruments. And then I went to Microsoft, where I ran 3 global divisions. And again, you can challenge Microsoft being in the forefront of technology, but it's always there. It's always a solid partner and getting them really focused in. So we had mobile products long before the Nokia acquisition, and I could go into a whole story about that. But what really got me started on Iridius was the responsibility I felt, because I started programming in AI back in 1981 when I went to university in a language called Lisp. We didn't have the processing power, we didn't have the data, and so therefore the use cases were not really applicable. But these were things that were being thought about for a very long time, so back to the early 30s, in fact, 1930s. And the challenge with AI is that it could run rogue. And I've had a specific focus on safe and responsible AI for an implementation for a very long time. And I've shared that passion with 3 of my co-founders, and one of whom was the chief change officer at Microsoft under Satya Nadella. And we really paired up about how do we enable companies and businesses and organizations deploy AI responsibly and safely to its customers to avoid brand reputational issues and safety, even physical safety for their employees in factory type settings. And these are all very real issues where AI needs to be responsible. And it's a very broad topic. And it's how do you do it? So the problem we're trying to solve are 2 things. 1, safe and responsible AI. And 2, how do you take AI solutions from a research project actually into production? Because over 80%, some say as high as 87% of AI projects never see production because of concerns around safety, responsibility, and the accuracy of what is coming back from the AI. That was a long-winded answer to your question, Dave.
Well, that's an incredible journey. You mentioned that companies invest millions in AI pilots that never reach production, creating these innovation theatres instead of business value. Can you explain this further and talk about what this often looks like?
So there's an AI arms race going on, let's face it. And every enterprise is trying to figure out their AI strategy and stories coming from the board on that. And for some companies, like heavily regulated industries like insurance, some companies are saying, we're not doing AI, period, full stop. That's not the answer either, because they're going to be outcompeted by the competition who is using AI safely and responsibly. So the AI theater that's going on right now is like, how do I pick the right use case? So there are 2 fundamental problems that we see with our clients today. One is the foundational aspect of their data. Do they have access to data? Is their data clean? Is the data set up in such a way that AI can access it and AI can reference it? And how do you do it in such a way that using data that you avoid hallucination? And that really comes back into context, because not everything, but most things about hallucination is the more context you give the model, the lower the hallucination you will get. And hallucination is where, for your audience, is where the AI says something that is inherently not true, but makes it appear so because it's rationalized it in its own way. And there's just a lack of transparency how it comes up how these models come up with their answers. And so part of what you have to have now is the observability and the transparency, all of the things that go to complexity. And then so these solutions can take months, if not years, to get into production for not only the safety and responsibility aspect, but the change management. So people's jobs are changing. They're not going to be eliminated, but they are going to be changed dramatically as a result of using AI. And I know there's a lot of noise in the industry with people like the CEO of Anthropic saying the other week when they launched Claude 4, 50% of entry level jobs will be gone within 5 years. That is likely true, but it's just like the days of the when the word processor came in. Everybody thought that executive assistants, who were known as secretaries back in those times, not great terminology, their jobs would be eliminated. They weren't. Became a new skill set. So executive assistants are more than just doing a lot more than just doing calendaring. They hold the organizations together in many cases, and jobs morph, and so it's about retooling, energizing. And so I argue and posit that people are not going to be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by somebody who is using AI. So learn AI now.
No, I absolutely agree. I've also said the very same thing, that AI doesn't replace people's jobs. It's people with AI skills replacing people without AI skills. So what was the moment or experience that made you realize that the AI industry had a fundamental problem with implementation versus experimentation?
Oh, so that's been going on for a while now. I mean, I've been observing this for multiple years where, everything about AI is about the data. And, we've had big data solutions out there now for well over a decade, maybe 20 years or more in some cases. And the data is inherently noisy. It's inherently got a lot of issues with it. So people have not got the foundational architecture of their data rights and set up in ways that AI can reliably consume it and safely consume it. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is, again, back to the use case. What business objective or what future are you trying to solve for, which is the question I ask, with this AI solution or system? And the answer is often operational efficiency. Well, that's great. That's one aspect of it. But is that really the only aspect? What is the business outcome? And what can the board accurately point to and the C-suite accurately point to that is driving their business forward for their own investor relations? And so it really comes down to that data, number one, and identifying the right use case, number two. Because if you pick the wrong use case, it's going to fail. And it's going to leave a bad taste in the C-suite and the board's mouth that it will delay any future implementations. So it behooves us to be selecting the right use case rather than rushing into implementing something that really has no or little intrinsic value to the organization.
Well, that absolutely makes sense. So you've described autonomous AI as the next frontier, and we're seeing a lot of buzz around AI agents at the moment. From your perspective, how advanced are we with autonomous AI systems? Are we seeing genuine breakthroughs, or is this just another hype cycle?
What a great question. So we are definitely in the hype cycle. There's no question about that. Is agentic this and agentic that, to the point where we actually don't use that language when we're communicating with customers, even though it's a full agentic system. We talk in terms of solutions, we talk in terms of adoption, we talk in terms of when you come into autonomous AI systems, the real key is, where does the human have to be in the loop? Because you want to ensure you have the right checks and balances, just like you would have in any well-run business with humans. You have checks and balances in place for a reason, right? Is to put the brakes on to make sure that you're not doing something that's dangerous to the company or its employees or its customers. And so the advancements that have been made on autonomous AI solutions has really only just started. And the rate of change that is happening is only going to accelerate. So if you think we're moving fast now, wait until the next couple of months, because we're already starting to see it happen. We saw Anthropic come out with Claude 4. We have seen OpenAI come out with O3 Pro. We're about to see OpenAI release GPT-5, which is arguably the first step into artificial general intelligence. And they're already making advancements on GPT-6 and GPT-7 and GPT-8. This is how quickly, and they're going to happen in rapid fire. And where are we starting to see some of these models come into play is actually into robotic systems, right? So robots that will actually work autonomously with around the home, that will run autonomously in the business, on the factory, all with safety, all responsibly, so that we don't hit that Terminator, Skynet nightmare scenario, which I'm not over exaggerating, is a very real threat, because if AI ran rogue, it could do something really bad from a society standpoint.
Well, that's very worrying indeed. So when you talk about agentic AI that can reason, plan, and execute complex business processes, what does that actually look like in practice? Can you walk us through a real-world example of an autonomous agent you've seen successfully deployed?
Sure. So what that actually looks like, so the thing to realize about agentic AI is when you look at legacy or existing SaaS systems or existing ISVs, ERP solutions, CRM solutions, name your solution out there, they're focused on tasks, right? And so the traditional tools use tasks, whereas agents are goal-oriented versus task-oriented, right? So the goal could be reduce my unplanned downtime from 30 hours a year to 3 minutes a year, right? Sounds like a lot, but it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is massive savings. I mean, we're talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of savings to a large scale manufacturer, like an automotive manufacturer, as an example, right? Unplanned or unscheduled downtime is, so prevent is not just preventative maintenance, it's predictive maintenance that's going in there. So that is a really good example. In financial services, fraud detection, early fraud detection, massive opportunity there for agentic solutions. And companies like JP Morgan Chase are already pretty well advanced on that. And then we start looking into other markets, into other industries. Customer service is absolutely a key thing to reduce the number of people. And it not only is it an operational efficiency gain, but it's also a customer satisfaction gain as well, because customers are now able to find access to their information, how to do things, which are probably 50% of all support calls from a technical standpoint, how to do things quickly, reliably, and it breeds loyalty and actually drive.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, it's Dave from the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast. I want to say thank you for listening to this episode. With your support, the podcast is continuing to grow from strength to strength. It's also a good chance to share this month's Listen Again episode from Series 4, where I talk about how to navigate the first 100 days in a technology leadership role. I break down the essentials every tech leader needs to know for a successful start. Definitely worth listening to that episode. Anyway, let's get back to the current episode. Well, there's so many opportunities there, as you've mentioned. So how do you distinguish between true autonomous AI and what might just be sophisticated automation? And what are those key characteristics that make an AI system truly agentic?
One word: concurrency. Being able to run in true parallel environments. Nothing is sequential. That is how you distinguish a true autonomous AI. Because when people are talking agentic systems today, many are still thinking about it in sequential, in the old software development lifecycle of sequential processing. True agentic solutions are very small snippets of code that do one thing and one thing only, and do it really well. And they adapt over time and learn over time, and all with as where appropriate with human oversight or human in the loop. And so it's really important to really think about this. We're finally getting to true parallelism in software. The old way of doing that is we had multi-core silicon, right? So we'd operate different parts of the code and different pieces of the silicon. Now that's still true, but these agents are running in parallel, and they could be executing, they could be waiting for some event to happen, or they could be observing, and so they're just continually running. They'd be doing any kinds of. But you set them goals. You don't set them tasks. You set them goals.
Now, the interesting thing is that most companies are still struggling with basic AI implementation, yet we're talking about autonomous agents. How do organizations bridge that gap? And what foundational elements need to be in place before they can even consider autonomous AI?
So they've got to bridge the gap. They've got to start with their data. Is my data architected in such a way that is going to make it ready for an AI implementation? And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to get to good enough. And that, again, really comes down to the chief data officer, which is why you start to see in a lot of these organizations, chief data and AI officers merged into one, because they're being synonymous with each other. And many are, they're struggling. They're struggling from a security standpoint, because now you're talking about how do you do things without, in the world of security, we talked about, SQL injections. Now we're talking about prompt injections. What happens when, and we just saw an instance of it last week where Microsoft's Copilot researchers found, there was ability to, inject code into a prompt that made the prompt behave badly. So that's not a good thing, right? Security is a top factor on there. The next big thing that they're struggling with is scalability. Again, back to the people are still thinking in these sequential senses. So how do you scale to millions, if not billions, of these agents? Wow, people haven't thought about that apart from a few companies like Iridius. And so it's really important to think about the scalability, the security, the privacy. If you're operating in the EU, not only do you have GDPR to worry about, but you also have the EU AI Act. In the US, we have several states with variants of the EU AI Act, like Utah and Colorado as examples. California has its own thing, and other states are adopting. We've got so much legislation that people don't know which way to turn, because legislation is in its infancy and is going to create change. And more often than not, the corporation's governance does not apply to AI. So they need to write governance around AI, and many companies are operating without governance. And that is you got to get your basic foundations done right. So governance, your data, all right, and then the use case, and having that set up, and then having a solution that you build upon. And here's a plug for Iridius's Solution Factory, that not only authors safe and responsible agents and agentic solutions or AI solutions in real time with compliance, regulatory, and governance built in, but it executes and monitors, so you can actually see where your security is breaking down. You can see or is being shored up, being able to see exactly how, with complete transparency, what the agents are doing and how they are doing it. So you've got complete transparency up and down the ladder. In the world of law enforcement, that's called chain of custody, right? It's being able to show from point A to point B. You've got complete visibility and transparency as to what's going on in the AI solution. And that's a big problem that is causing companies to hold off on deploying these into production. And then the last part is they're forgetting about change management. How do we actually get people to adopt this AI solution, whether it's a customer or internal? You've got to be thinking through the whole process here.
And that's really interesting, because earlier on you mentioned that AI is only as good as your data, and mentioned seeing multi-million-dollar projects crumble because of poor data management. What are the most common mistakes you see organizations making when they start their AI journey?
Well, data is all over the place, right? And you've got to first of all take an inventory where all of your data is. Now, that may seem simple, but many organizations, if not most organizations, struggle with this. And it's a very real problem, right? So some data might be in ERP, some data might be on an AWS S3 instance, some data might be, it's spread all over the place. Being able to know where it is, who's got the rights to access it, is the data holistic and clean, and what do you need to do to cleanse that data? So that in itself could be another agentic solution, is to cleanse your data, right? So getting all of those basics done, as well as governance and starting that off, is absolutely key. The mistakes that we see are where people have missed one or more of those steps in doing that, and they're wondering why they're not getting as much success as they would have expected, and it's costing them a lot to operate. We had one customer, who shall remain nameless, who has an AI solution that's costing them $20,000 a day to operate and is offering no value to the corporation at all, but contractually, they are obligated to keep it running. And so they're wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on this solution that is not going anywhere and won't go anywhere. And it's a problem. And so that's a very expensive one. You're seeing other companies bet their farm on certain solutions, and then you're seeing situations like in Air Canada, agentic solutions selling airfares for the wrong price. You've seen situations of where you start seeing shadow AI, where you're seeing intellectual property show up, into models. Samsung fell prey to that a year or two ago, as an example. These are all very public cases of AI going wrong. And we all remember early days of chatbots with racism and bias coming out of these chatbots. I mean, that's gotten a lot better, but you've got to be careful.
And for a company that's sitting on years' worth of unstructured, siloed data, where do they start? What's the first step in preparing their data for AI success?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is they've got to figure out a way to get their data vectorized. I mean, that's the key. That's the key. I mean, you got to build up a graph database that can then be accessible by the AI. That's what you've got to do. It's a lot of work. There's so much data debt out there right now, Dave. It's not even funny.
Yeah, that is really scary. Now, looking ahead to the next few years and beyond, what industries or use cases do you think will be the first to see widespread adoption of truly autonomous AI agents? And where will we see the biggest impact?
Well, the core industries that we're seeing that happening in are healthcare and life sciences for early detections of cancer. You're seeing in pharma bespoke pharmaceuticals and novel elements being discovered and novel chemicals being discovered for to help cure various diseases. In manufacturing, there's massive opportunity to implement AI because you think about repeatable processes. There's nothing like manufacturing to do that, and financial services. So I think it's going to be across the board, but those will be, when you're talking about highly regulated industries, it's going to be slower and more careful and more conservative. But that's why companies like Iridius exist, to help those companies stay ahead of that arms race.
And if listeners remember just one thing from this conversation today, what would you like that to be?
Pick the right use case and get your data right. I gave you not one thing. I overachieved and gave you two things, Dave. So it's get your data, get the data foundation correct and ready for AI, and get your use case.
Excellent. That's fantastic advice. So for listeners who want to learn more about your work or connect with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Two ways to do that is, first of all, we have our own podcast called the Agentic Insider, and you'll find all your different channels our podcast is on. And on LinkedIn, you can find me at Phillip-Swan, and that's Philip with two L's, and DM me, and I'll be happy to respond anyway to you that way.
Well, that's all we've got time for today, but a huge thank you again, Phillip. Thank you for sharing your insights with the audience today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And thank you once again for being part of the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast.
It's been a pleasure being here, Dave. Thank you.